Hans, are we the baddies? The laziest of dystopian fiction writers could not come up with a more stereotypical army of evil minions. A monolithic, pervasive, fanatical, ruthless force of crack fighters goose-stepping over Europe with skulls and lightning bolts emblazoned on their black uniforms. We are, of course, talking about the Schutzstaffel, better known as the SS, one of the paramilitary units to emerge from the ranks of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, one which eventually grew to become a parallel force within the armed forces, a state within the state, a horde of policemen, judges, and executioners responsible for the killings of millions of so-called undesirables. The SA and the Stostrup. The political party, colloquially known as the Nazis, was founded in January 1919 with the unassuming name the German Workers' Party. During its first rallies, discipline was maintained by loosely organized troops of stewards in charge of protecting party speakers and dejecting hecklers. The party grew in importance and visibility after hiring a certain Austrian painter as its propaganda specialist and rebranding itself as the National Socialist German Workers' Party in February 1920. When the artist formerly known as Corporal Hitler rose to the top position, he saw fit to reorganize the growing number of stewards into a formal paramilitary force. These were the Sturmabteilung, the Storm Detachment, or SA for short. Modeled after Mussolini's black shirts, these troops wore brown shirts instead and were led by Ernst Röhm, a former officer of the German stormtroopers during World War I. And just like their Italian counterpart, Röhm's brown shirts did not limit their operations to protecting party leaders. They actively attacked and disrupted other parties' activities, engaging in massive street brawls against the socialist and communist factions. But the brown shirts became too numerous, too powerful to be fully trusted by Hitler. Besides, Röhm and his acolytes did not hide their revolutionary and anti-capitalist feelings, which could alienate the early financial backers of the Nazis. This is why, in 1923, Hitler ordered the formation of a small personal bodyguard that would answer only to him. They were initially called the Stabsverheer or Security Guard. The group was soon renamed Adolf Hitler Stoßtrupp, the Shock Troop, or as Hitler put it, the first group of toughs. This gang of toughs wore the same khaki uniforms as the SA, but they differentiated themselves by donning a black cap emblazoned with a skull and crossbones badge. This symbol clearly signified that these heavies meant business, but it was also a throwback to Imperial Germany's military tradition. The Death's Head, or Totenkopf, in fact, was a badge used by elite Hussar units. The first leader of the Stoßtrupp was Julius Schreck, a World War I veteran who also acted as Hitler's chauffeur. Schreck's small unit included a colourful cast of characters such as Ulrich Graf, a former butcher and amateur wrestler, or Emil Maurice, a convicted embezzler who would later serve as Hitler's secretary and even date the Führer's niece. The Stoßtrupp was the launchpad for top Nazi officials such as Rudolf Hess or military officers like Joseph Sepp Dietrich, the most decorated German soldier of World War II. With the backing of the SA and the more elite Stoßtrupp, Hitler and his acolytes began planning a coup or putsch to take over Bavaria and later the whole of Germany. This was the infamous Munich Beer Hall Putsch of November the 8th, 1923. The first assault on Bavarian institutions on the night of the 8th went well enough for the conspirators. The morning after, Hitler and his chief ally, World War I hero General Ludendorff, marched towards the Bavarian War Ministry with the Stoßtrupp leading the vanguard. In Odeonsplatz, the rebels were met by 100 Bavarian policemen armed with a no-nonsense attitude and also guns. A firefight ensued with casualties on both sides. Hitler himself risked getting shot, but one of his loyal Stoßtruppen, Ulrich Graf, threw himself in front of the bullets. Presumably, he did this in slow motion while yelling, "Nine!" And so it was that Graf performed his duty, suffering heavy wounds to save the life of his party leader, who would later go on to make this sacrifice completely pointless by killing himself in the Führer bunker. Ungrateful of anything. The putsch overall had been a disaster, and Hitler was incarcerated. Whilst in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf and came to a key strategic decision. The National Socialist Party could not rise to power via an armed insurrection. He would rise to the top by exploiting the framework of democracy. But if peaceful means and respectability were the new fashion, well, what to do with the ever-growing ranks of the uncouth and brawling SA? The Führer only required a small force of elite bodyguards, but when he was released from prison in December 1924, the brown shirts had expanded to 30,000 men. The new direction in party strategy led to a rift with Ernst Röhm, who decided to emigrate to Bolivia in 1925. As per Herr Hitler, he ordered his old friend Julius Schreck to reassemble his personal guard, which had been disbanded following the failed putsch. The Praetorian unit was reassembled, albeit with a different name, the Schutzkommando, or Protection Unit. After another name change to Sturmstaffel, Assault Squadron, they finally settled on Protection Squadron, or in German, Schutzstaffel. The SS were born. Early days of the SS. The official founding date of the SS was November the 9th, 1925, the second anniversary of the failed Munich coup. But Schreck had been recruiting members since at least September the 21st that year. Initially, the SS counted only 8 members, but following Schreck's September recruitment drive, each party district across Germany was asked to form a 10-man squad under one officer. The only exception was Berlin, where the local Nazis were allowed to recruit a 22-men unit. The purpose of the new SS was not only to protect the person of Adolf Hitler, but also to provide security to other Nazi officials and properties across the country. Despite the broadening scope of their activities, SS recruitment standards were always kept stringent. The ideal candidate had to be aged between 23 and 35 years old, tall, healthy, and strongly built. They had to be residents of the same area for at least 5 years with no criminal record, and their application had to be supported by 2 guarantors. Furthermore, SS guidelines excluded habitual drunkards, gossip mongers, and other delinquents. Every man was expected to adhere to the strictest discipline. Deviations from superiors' orders were punished with cash fines, removal of the coveted swastika armband, or even dismissal from service. Following acceptance into the protection squad, each man had to swear loyalty not only to the Nazi Party, but also to the person of Adolf Hitler. The Führer rewarded their loyalty by awarding the SS with a precious relic, a blood-stained swastika flag, a memento of the Munich coup. This caused the resentment of the SA, who felt that they had been a much more active part than the predecessors of the SS, the Stoßtruppe. But if the SS had the flag, the SA had, well, the SS. The new leader of the Brown Shirts, Franz Pfeffer von Solomon, in fact, acted as commanding officer to Julius Schreck, head of the SS. Von Solomon asserted his dominance by employing SS troops in the districts as errand boys, performing administrative tasks for the party. In spite of this treatment, and in spite of Hitler's newfound desire for respectability, the SS occasionally found the occasion to prove their mettle in street battles. For example, in 1926, the 10-man squad in Dresden had successfully beaten off an attack of 50 communists against the local Nazi officers. In that year, SS leader, or Reichsführer, Julius Schreck, handed over the baton to former Stoss trooper Joseph Berchtold. But the new Reichsführer did not tolerate interference from the SA and soon resigned in favor of his deputy, Erhard Haydn. Under Haydn, the Schutzstaffel underwent a period of decline, with its ranks shrinking from 1,000 to a mere 280 in the span of just 2 years. Moreover, some nasty rumors started circulating about Haydn. Apparently, his uniform had been customized by a Jewish tailor. When such allegations reached the ears of Hitler, he promptly dismissed Haydn. From here, on January the 5th, 1929, the position of Reichsführer was entrusted to Haydn's deputy, a former army officer, fertilizer salesman, and chicken farmer with outstanding managerial skills called Heinrich Himmler, who would soon take the SS from small ragtag group of men to one of the most powerful forces in all of Germany. The Himmler years. On this note, making good use of his organizational skills, Himmler revived the SS, bringing its numbers back up to 1,000 by December 1929 and then to 3,000 by the end of 1930. Ideal recruits under Himmler had to be over 5 foot 8 inches tall or 1.73 meters. They had to look outwardly Aryan or Nordic and had to provide evidence of their ancestry going back to January 1800, with officers required to trace their lineage all the way back to 1750 to prove that they did not have any Jewish blood. Now, it should be noted here that much of Himmler's leadership and old guard did not fulfill this criteria, but the Reichsführer made an exception for those who had served in World War I. And what about the man himself, who hadn't actually served in the Great War and didn't meet his own criteria? Well, if you make the rules, you can apparently break the rules too. As for everyone else, after completing a rigorous selection and an extensive training program, it was time to swear a personal oath of allegiance to Hitler. It read, "I swear to thee, Adolf Hitler, loyalty and bravery. I vow to thee and to the superiors that you appoint obedience unto death. So help me God." New SS men then received a ceremonial dagger, which they paid for themselves. Under Himmler's direction, the SS increased in size and prestige, so much so that Hitler decided to make them independent from the SA. This was reflected by the uniform. SS men still wore the traditionally brown attire inherited from the SA, but Himmler personalized it by introducing a black kepi hat with the skull and crossbones, and a black tie and a black crossbelt. The Reichsführer also abandoned the old system of 10-man squads, each led by a district officer, and replaced it with a military hierarchy, albeit with distinctive ranks. For example, the equivalent of sergeant major in the SS was called Scharführer, or band leader. The captain was a Hauptsturmführer, or main assault leader, and so on. The year 1929 is remembered also for a major cataclysmic event. the Great Depression. The subsequent economic downturn led to a sharp increase in SA membership, as many unemployed workers joined the organization alongside a great number of ordinary criminals. As a consequence, discipline plummeted, and the number of violent incidents involving the brown shirts escalated out of control. At the same time, some factions within the SA vied for more power. They wanted to completely absorb the Reichswehr, the armed forces, or ally themselves with the communists. Needless to say, a confrontation within the Nazi Party was inevitable. And so it was that in the summer of 1930, the leader of the SA in Berlin, Walter Stenz, issued a series of demands to Hitler. He wanted his troopers to be presented as candidates for parliamentary elections, and he demanded that the SS be excluded from providing security at Nazi Party rallies. Upon Hitler's refusal, Stenz and his men attacked the Nazi headquarters in Berlin, clashing with the SS standing guard. Himmler's troops were heavily outnumbered, and eventually the brown shirts took over the party offices. Hitler recalled Rom from Bolivia, hoping that the old leader could restore order. But Stenz was out of control, going so far as to denounce Hitler and propaganda leader Joseph Goebbels for betraying Nazi ideals. The uprising was quelled only when the party expelled from their rank all SA units that had rebelled. This automatically deprived them of any funding. With the money gone, support for Stenz quickly evaporated. The SD. During this struggle, the SS had remained staunchly loyal to party leadership. Hitler thus entrusted Himmler with the task of rooting out any dissenting voices. The SS commander carried this out with the help of a new hire, a former Navy officer called Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich had been discharged from the Navy in April 1931 for conduct unbecoming of a gentleman. In brief, he had dated a girl for 6 months, but then married another lady. In May, he was interviewed by Himmler, who was looking for a security expert to set up an intelligence service within the SS. Heydrich, whose intelligence experience consisted of reading spy novels, nonetheless impressed Himmler, who hired him on the spot as the head of the security service. Heydrich created a system of index cards, filing personal details about any potential enemy of the party: communists, Catholics, Freemasons, Jews, aristocrats, conservatives, and Nazi Party members suspected of disloyalty or deemed unreliable due to debts or scandals. The following year, 1932, SS membership ballooned to 30,000. These troops now paraded around with their new dapper, infamous black uniforms, the ones commonly associated with the stereotypical image of the Nazi enforcers. Contrary to popular belief, these uniforms were not designed by Hugo Boss, but two SS members, Professor Karl Diebitsch and Walter Heck. Hugo Boss and later other clothing factories were simply contracted to manufacture the attire. In any event, by 1933, Walter Heck introduced another distinctive element: the two S's styled as lightning bolts, a design borrowed from old pagan runic script. Initially, the bolt insignia adorned only the lapels of Hitler's personal guard, but then they were extended to every unit. Rise to power. In January 1933, Hitler's long-term strategy to gain power via legitimate means, albeit with frequent beatings and harassment of the opposition, finally paid off. President Hindenburg appointed Hitler Chancellor, or head of the government. 2 months later, the Nazis would win 288 seats in the Reichstag, the German parliament. The only problem was that the Reichstag wasn't really there any longer, as it had been burned down in a fire on the 27th of February. Apparently, the fire had been set by Marinus van der Lubbe, a Dutch communist, with strong suspicion that it may have been a Nazi false flag attack. Whoever was the actual culprit, Hitler took the occasion to pass an emergency decree providing sweeping police powers to the SS and the SA, tasked with protecting the state from its enemies. Brown shirts and black uniforms prowled the streets, rounding up thousands of political opponents. It was the first step in a hostile takeover of Germany and its institutions, a process in which the SS would play a pivotal role. Following the Enabling Act of March the 23rd, Hitler swept aside all political parties except his own, and leading Nazis were appointed in top positions throughout the country. One of them, Adolf Wagner, became Minister of the Interior for Bavaria, a move favored by Himmler and his trusty master spy Heydrich. Overnight, the two top SS officers gained control of all police forces within Bavaria. This was Himmler's endgame: infiltrate all police and security forces in the Third Reich and eventually bring them under SS control. Bavaria was the first step. Here, the SS and regular police forces rounded up hundreds of socialists, trade unionists, Catholic activists, and other suspected enemies of the regime. Regular prisons could not hold them all, so Himmler and his acolytes had to get creative. The political prisoners were herded into a decommissioned munitions factory surrounded by a barbed wire fence. The location of the facility was Dachau, the first Nazi concentration camp. Command of Dachau was handed over to SS officer Theodor Eick, who formed a new unit in charge of guarding the prisoners. This was the SS Totenkopfverbande, the Death's Head unit, birth of the Gestapo. Following their success in Bavaria, Himmler and Heydrich sought to extend their grasp over the police force in Prussia, which implied control of the capital city, Berlin. The Prussian police was already rife with SA and SS men after all, but there was a snag. The Minister of the Interior for the Prussian state was top Nazi official Hermann Goering. He was too powerful, too close to Hitler to relinquish control of his security apparatus to those schemers in black uniforms. Most of all, Goering wanted to prevent the SS from infiltrating the political and intelligence functions of his police. On April 26, 1933, Goering merged these two functions into a new organization and assigned it command to a civil servant not affiliated to the Nazi Party. This man was called Rudolf Diels. He was the first head of the newly formed secret state police, in German, the Geheimstaatspolizei, or Gestapo for short. Diels was a good cop. Perhaps too good. So good, in fact, that he had the audacity to begin arresting SS and SA men when their actions became too heavy-handed. Now, few liked the SA at this stage. They numbered in the millions, had anti-capitalist tendencies, and their leader, Ernst Röhm, sought to replace the regular armed forces. Goering in particular was wary of the SA gaining too much power in Prussia, and Diels' Gestapo was too small a force to effectively oppose them. In early 1934, Goering had to face another threat to the independence of the police within his jurisdiction. Wilhelm Frick, Minister of the Interior for the entire Reich, wanted to absorb the Prussian police under a unified federal force. To protect his independence, Goering begrudgingly forced an alliance with Himmler. The Reichsführer SS would help Goering in keeping Frick at bay. In exchange, Goering had to dismiss Diels and hand over the Gestapo to the SS and Reinhard Heydrich in particular. The deal was sealed on April 20th, 1934. By controlling the SD, the Gestapo as well as the regular SS troops, Himmler now oversaw all secret and political policing activities within the German Reich. Night of the Long Knives. Himmler was clearly making big strides in consolidating the SS as the premier paramilitary arm of the Nazi Party, the chief enforcer of Nazi ideology and Aryan purity. There was one last obstacle to clear: the SA. Once the backbone of Nazi support, the khaki-clad troopers were living on borrowed time. As mentioned earlier, Röhm held ambitions for his brown shirts to completely replace the regular armed forces. This did not sit well with the generals, of course, nor did it sit well with Hitler, who needed the general support for his next power move, eliminating the position of president, thus concentrating all executive power within the hands of the chancellor, i.e. himself. This would have made him the unique, undisputed Führer of the Germans. Sure, Röhm had been a trusty ally in the early struggles for National Socialism, but he had grown too ambitious, too anti-capitalist. Furthermore, he was openly homosexual, as were several top SA officers. A regime built on manly traditional values could not abide such deviations from the norm. In February and March 1934, Röhm made it clear that he was angling for an appointment as Minister of War. Hitler did not immediately say no and met with him on June 2nd. At the meeting, Hitler convinced Röhm to take a month of leave during July. While the SA leader and most of his officers were chilling out, Himmler and Heydrich were scheming. They manufactured evidence incriminating Röhm of accepting French money to overthrow Hitler in an impending coup. The two SS officers compiled lists of SA men, political adversaries, and other targets suspected of disloyalty. Himmler then ordered his trusted officer, Sepp Dietrich, to assemble and arm two companies of men selected from the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, the recently created elite unit of bodyguards to the Führer. Dietrich's companies were equipped by the regular army and dispatched to the town of Bad Wiese in Bavaria. This was the beginning of the Purge that was codenamed Operation Hummingbird and better known as the Night of the Long Knives. The SS surrounded the hotel where Röhm and his lieutenants were enjoying their period of leave or indulging in a homosexual orgy, depending on versions. Hitler himself then traveled to Bad Wiese to oversee the arrest of the SA leadership. Röhm and 6 of his officers were taken to Munich and imprisoned. The 6 were shot immediately in the prison's courtyard. Röhm's execution could have been avoided, as Hitler had second thoughts, but Himmler convinced him to go ahead with the order. The commander of Dachau, Theodor Eicke, and his deputy, Marco Lippert, walked into Röhm's cell and shot him twice. With his last breath, the fallen SA leader muttered, Mein Führer, to which Eicke replied, You should have thought of that before. Now it's too late. Meanwhile, all over Germany, SS men and Gestapo officers received the secret password Colibri, or Hummingbird. As per instructions, they opened sealed envelopes containing the kill list of alleged conspirators to eliminate. Himmler's and Heydrich's best and brightest went on a 2-day assassination spree, targeting SA officers, old and current rivals of the Nazi cadres, as well as completely unrelated victims. For example, the music critic of a Munich newspaper, Mr. Wilhelm Schmidt, was abducted by the SS and returned to his widow in a casket with strict instructions not to open it. The unlucky critic had been the victim of an unfortunate typo, it appears. The SS were after one Wilhelm Schmidt with a T at the end, a general with the SA. Other notable victims included former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher, shot in his home alongside his wife. Theodor Reich took personal care of Gustav von Kahr, who had been head of the Bavarian government during the failed putsch of 1923. The 71-year-old was taken to Dachau, tortured, and hacked to death with a pickaxe. The purge did not spare Hitler's former Nazi Party comrade, deputy, and rival, Gregor Strasser. The Gestapo dragged him to a cellar in Berlin, where he was shot from behind. The death was ruled a suicide. The entire operation had been a great success for Himmler and his acolytes. The Führer duly rewarded him with a decree dated July the 26th, which promoted the SS to the status of an independent organization within the Nazi Party. This promotion would allow Himmler to operate without any supervision and to fulfill his vision of turning the SS into the backbone of all police forces, as well as a parallel army loyal to the Nazi Party rather than to the German nation. Himmler's army. An army, by definition, requires weapons, but surprisingly, thus far, the only SS unit officially allowed to carry firearms were the bodyguards of Adolf Hitler. But this was not enough for Himmler. In September 1934, he wrested from War Minister von Blumberg the permission to create 3 regiments of armed SS troops. These were the Werfkunsttruppe, the disposition troops. They were called the SSVT for short. Establishing the SSVT required Himmler to create a training program and an officer academy called the Junkerschule. Officer candidates were selected amongst the SS and Gestapo and even what remained of the SA. Recruits had to comply with the usual racial purity standards required by Himmler and be at least 5 foot 10 inches or 1.78 meters tall. The curriculum included basic military training, advanced assault tactics, war games to learn the principles of strategy, as well as etiquette courses. Because by day you may be shooting unarmed prisoners in the bag, but come dinner time you better use the right fork with the salad. Classroom training also included hours of political and ideological studies. Recruits had to study Mein Kampf and were indoctrinated on why the Aryans were the natural master race and thus entitled to, well, dump on everybody else. From 1938 onward, the SSVT trainees were allowed to practice their skills by staging large-scale training maneuvers with live ammunition and artillery. Before then, the main method to hone their battlefield prowess was through sport, and lots of it. For example, the SS practiced track and field, rowing, and boxing. A training manual at the time read, "Sport arouses belligerence, hardens the will, promotes self-discipline, and therefore promotes the training of the SS man to the level of a combat-effective fighter. In addition, it should also afford the SS man relaxation and rest and give him pleasure." At the end of the 5-month course, only 1/3 of the recruits made it to graduation. Those who qualified were inducted into the SSVT with one of the many pseudo-esoteric rituals loved by Himmler, an enthusiast of pagan and occult studies. These celebrations were often conducted at night with torches and searchlights illuminating SS insignia and other symbols inspired by Nordic lore. Other landmark events included the Winter Solstice celebration, which replaced the Christian Christmas, and the SS Irrwein, or marriage wine, a sort of pagan wedding ceremony invented by Himmler. These rituals had a powerful effect on the morale of SS troops as it fostered a esprit de corps, a sense of belonging to a powerful, cohesive organization, somehow different and loftier than the average Huns in the street. Or, at least, that was Himmler's intentions. Even before his time, SS troops have been perpetuating another tradition which has done wonders to prop up the morale of armed units everywhere at any time, and that's drinking alcohol. The SS, alcohol, and sex. The SS, and the SA before them, had formalized their drinking binges into celebrations called fellowship evenings. According to Professor Edward Westerman of Texas A&M University, they promoted internal cohesion, expressed an exaggerated masculine identity, and fostered comradeship amongst perpetrators of mass murder. A fellowship evening usually started with a formal troop inspection, followed by a speech usually delivered by a World War I veteran. After singing Nazi Party songs, participants raised their tankards and beer flowed like there was no tomorrow. Fellowship evening became a staple among concentration camp guards before and during World War I. In fact, the inauguration of Dachau was celebrated with one such event. According to later testimony by camp survivors, drinking sprees went hand in hand with beatings and killings of prisoners as the guards competed to outdo each other. An Auschwitz survivor, Philip Müller, recalled how the SS threw a fellowship evening in honor of a comrade's promotion to sergeant. The merry companions drank and danced to folk music, one door away from a crematorium filled with bodies awaiting to be burned. A variation on the fellowship evenings were the Siegesfeiern, or victory celebrations, staged after conducting a mass killing of Jews, Roma, Slavs, or other undesirables. Here, SS troops from all ranks, including senior officers and Gestapo personnel, competed by out-drinking each other and boasting about the number of kills. It appears that both types of drinking rituals were not just meant to cement camaraderie or celebrate achievements, but also a coping mechanism for SS guards who witnessed and perpetrated acts of violence multiple times a day. In a speech in January 1942, Himmler himself acknowledged that the brutal camp duty could damage the character of his fine troops. Hence, it was important for them to indulge in alcohol to vent steam and maintain discipline. There was another way to avoid the stresses of mass murder, and that was, well, not committing mass murder. SS troops were clearly bound to obey superiors by their oath, but there were reported instances of SS soldiers who refused to participate in violence in the camps and asked to be relocated to frontline duties instead. On this one, those who refused to kill innocents were branded by their fellow troops as little mama's boys, or Schlapsfans. That's German for limp, by the way. Clearly a well-defined and overt masculine identity was of great importance to the SS. Troops were encouraged to marry perfect Aryan or Nordic women and breed numerous children for the benefit of the Reich as part of the eugenics program Lebensborn, or Front of Life, launched by Himmler in 1935. Now, we've done a full video on this before, but in short, the program sought out unmarried pregnant women of good racial stock, offering them support to raise their children, as well as trying to recruit others of good Aryan stock to come and be used as the female half of breeding pairs with SS members. During the course of the war, SS men were also encouraged to impregnate women in occupied territory, and their offspring were taken into care by the program. Furthermore, the SS perpetrated the kidnapping of many thousands of children from conquered lands to be raised as Germans in foster homes. The goal of Lebensborn was to curb the decrease in Aryan birth rates. Anything that contributed to that decline was to be actively opposed, which meant that homosexuality was also considered a particularly vile crime. In February of 1937, Himmler boasted to his generals that only 8 to 10 cases of homosexuality per year were recorded in the SS. He hoped to reduce the numbers even further by sending homosexual troops to concentration camps and having them shot while trying to escape. Himmler's estimates were far from accurate, however, as same-sex relationships among Nazi armed units were far more common than their leaders were willing to admit. In 1940, the SS internal courts debated 16 cases of homosexuality and 22 cases in the first quarter of 1943 alone. It appears that, out of all arrests from homosexuality carried out in the city of Dusseldorf, 57% involved an SS or SA trooper. As World War II progressed, Himmler spoke out about and against gay relationships more often than any other Nazi leader, advocating for the immediate execution of these degenerates. Only in 1945 did he soften his stance by proposing to have offenders sent to the front lines to prove themselves. Branching out. Speaking of spicy time, from 1939 to 1942, the SS ran a high-end brothel in Berlin, the Salon Kitty. This was the brainchild of Reinhard Heydrich and his head of counterintelligence, Walter Schellenberg. The original madam of the establishment, Kitty Schmidt, was arrested in June 1939 after smuggling money out of Germany and was offered a deal: either go to a concentration camp or allow the SS to take over. Schmidt complied, and Schellenberg installed dozens of microphones in the bedrooms. He then hired girls arrested by the Vice Squad and trained them on subtly extracting information from high-end clients during pillow talk. Thus, Heydrich and Schellenberg were able to collect confidential information about businessmen, Nazi cadres, and foreign diplomats. Notable clients of Salon Kitty included Galeazzo Ciano, the Italian foreign minister, and Mussolini's son-in-law. Heydrich himself was a regular patron, although he took care of having the microphones turned off during his liaisons. The SS differentiated into several other unconventional activities, normally not associated with a police and military force. For example, in 1936, Himmler and Professor Karl Diebitsch, designer of the infamous black SS uniform, acquired a porcelain factory to produce a profitable series of Aryan and Nazi-inspired knickknacks. Himmler eventually established the economic and administrative main office to manage all of the SS's for-profit enterprises, including the bottling and distribution of mineral water. And when I say for profit, I really mean it. The Reichsfuhrer SS employed almost exclusively slave labor from concentration camps, maximizing profit margins. Moving on from there, in July 1935, Himmler branched out into anthropological and archaeological research by founding the Ancestral Heritage Organization. This organization sought to confirm pseudoscientific notions about the superiority of the Aryan race by tracing its ancestral origins. From 1935 to 1935, these researchers conducted expeditions to Finland, Sweden, Italy, the Middle East, and Tibet, among others. Some of these expeditions were limited to studying and cataloguing ancient petroglyphs and folklore. Others sought to prove that the ancient Romans descended from a Nordic race or that the Buddha had Aryan heritage. An interesting aside here, their activities likely inspired the depiction of a cult-crazed Nazi seeking ancient artifacts in the Indiana Jones films. An SS officer called Otto Rahn did indeed conduct research on the Holy Grail in southern France, but he was never part of this group and was an outspoken opponent of Hitler's regime. Rahn eventually left the SS and suffered persecution from the Gestapo until his mysterious death in July 1939. During the war, the Ancestral Heritage Organization took on increasingly sinister tasks. For example, they provided infrastructure, funding, and and materials to SS doctors at Dachau and other concentration camps to conduct medical experiments on unwilling subjects, which almost invariably resulted in their death. Unstoppable Himmler. Besides these interesting side gigs, Himmler's focus remains on expanding the SS's policing, intelligence, and military branches. By the end of 1935, his right-arm man Heydrich had expanded the Gestapo personnel from 35 to 607 agents who carried out 7,000 arrests in 1935 and 1936 alone. The secret police was an incredibly powerful tool in Hitler's hands to get rid of high-ranking opponents, including the Commander-in-Chief of the Army, General von Fritsch, and Minister of War, Marshal von Blumberg. Both top officers opposed Hitler's plans for an upcoming war to expand in Eastern Europe and would soon come to regret it. An informant of the Gestapo, one Otto Schmidt, reported that an officer called Fritsch had been involved in a homosexual affair. This turned out to be a completely different officer, but Himmler and Heydrich seized the occasion to have the general court-martialed. The subsequent trial recognized that there had been a case of mistaken identity, and Schmidt, the informant, was shot. Nonetheless, von Fritsch was dismissed from his position. As per von Blumberg, Heydrich came into possession of illicit photos of Blumberg's wife, proving that she was a former prostitute. Another sex scandal led to another dismissal. Thus, the armed forces had been effectively decapitated, and Hitler reorganized their leadership into the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the OKW, answerable only to him. As for Himmler, he was not content with overseeing a relatively small secret police force. In June 1936, the SS top dog pressured the German government for an appointment as a Minister of the Interior. The current minister, Wilhelm Frick, resisted pressure, but eventually conceded that Himmler be appointed chief of police. Whilst formerly subordinate to Frick, Himmler reported directly to Hitler. And more importantly, he was now at the head of all national and local police forces, including the criminal police, or Kripo, and the regular uniformed police, or ORPRO. In September 1939, Himmler consolidated all police forces, the Gestapo and his intelligence services, the SD, into a single organization, the Reich Security Head Office, or RSHA in its German acronym. It appears that 1936 was a momentous year for the Schutzstaffel. In the same year, Dachau commander Theodor Eich created a new infamous department, the SS Totenkopfverbande, or Death's Head Unit. Initially conceived to guard concentration camps, this unit grew to 8,000 troops by 1939 and was later used in military operations. Meanwhile, the military branch of the SS saw some expansion. In August 1938, the armed regiments of the SS-VT were expanded into a division-sized unit. This became the basis for the notorious Waffen-SS, the parallel armed force which fought alongside the regular army in World War II. The term Waffen simply means weapons or arms in German, by the way, which makes these the armed SS. Now, those of you who have a thing for internal structures may be wondering how Himmler actually organized his men, whose number ballooned to 250,000 by the start of the war. The SS were divided into three main branches. We have already covered two of them, the Waffen-SS and the RSHA, Heydrich's Reich Security Head Office. The third one was the Allgemeine SS, or General Purpose Branch, which oversaw a variety of activities and departments, such as the Economic and Administrative Office in charge of managing the slave labor force, or the Legal Department, which enforced discipline within the SS. The SS also had their own propaganda team, which edited and published the weekly paper Das Schwarze Korps, or the Black Corps. Another key department was the Race and Settlement Main Office, or Russia, or RUSHA, which enforced racial laws amongst SS ranks and planned the settlement of ethnic Germans in occupied lands. Finally, they also conducted an educational program via the Adolf Hitler schools, 12 facilities which educated, or rather indoctrinated, boys and girls ages 14 to 18 on the tenets of Nazi ideology. The SS at war. As World War II erupted in September 1939, the most active branch was, of course, the Waffen-SS. Hitler's units would become a feared fighting force, regarded as elite by their foes. Interestingly, their baptism of fire in the invasion of Poland was far from a stellar performance, with regular Wehrmacht officers pointing out their poor training. The Wehrmacht also complained about the crimes of war perpetrated by SS soldiers in occupied territories, going so far as court-martialing them for shooting Polish prisoners of war. Himmler argued to Hitler that the poor performance was due to a lack of equipment and stifling supervision by the Wehrmacht. His complaints must have struck a chord, as the Führer allowed Himmler to set up his own military procurement office and military tribunals. Which is a good thing for the SS, as one of the roles of all SS units was the extermination of undesirables in occupied territories. The SS had played a key role in delineating the so-called final solution to the Jewish problem from the very start. It was the SD, or security service, who had orchestrated the Night of Broken Glass, the infamous pogrom of November the 9th, 1938. Then it was chiefly the SS who manned and coordinated the Einsatzgruppen, or operation groups, who carried out the Holocaust by bullets during the early phases of Operation Barbarossa. And it was Reinhard Heydrich who in January 1942 chaired the Wannsee Conference, during which Nazi leadership planned the systematic extermination of millions of Jews and other undesirables. After World War II, Waffen-SS veterans distanced themselves from the horrors of the Holocaust, claiming that these were perpetrated by units in the rear, such as the Totenkopf Division or concentration camp guards. In reality, the Waffen-SS were frequently rotated between frontline and rear duties, thereby implicating fighting units in the administration of the camps. In any event, by the late stages of the war, manpower shortages meant that Himmler could no longer be so picky about recruiting only Germans of pure Aryan stock for his SS. In fact, by 1945, the Waffen-SS was one of the most diverse formations of the war. The SS actively recruited volunteers and conscripts from occupied, allied, satellite, and even neutral countries. By April 1945, the Waffen-SS counted almost 830,000 troops. Of these, only about 40% were German nationals. A further 30% were ethnic Germans recruited from other countries, and the remaining 30% were volunteers and conscripts hailing from 17 different nationalities. The foreign troops made up 21 out of a total of 38 SS divisions. Notable examples include the Viking and Nordland divisions recruited in Scandinavia, the two Litischer divisions from Latvia, and the Charmaine division made up of French volunteers. These units were categorized as front-rank divisions, fully fitted and operational for frontline duties. Detachments of the Viking, Nordland, and Charmaine even fought in the bitter, desperate defense of Berlin against the Red Army. In most cases, however, foreign divisions were categorized as being second rank or even phantom. This meant that they were never fully equipped and were mainly used in the rear, generally in an anti-partisan capacity. Despite Himmler's best or worst efforts, the SS and the German military as a whole were doomed to lose the war. Heinrich Himmler himself was captured by the Allies and committed suicide on the 23rd of May 1945. The horrors of the crimes committed by his troops would soon be revealed to the world as Nazi officials and SS personnel went on trial at Nuremberg.